Two abandoned homesteads, a property steeped in strange history, and a discovery about to shake the investigation to its core. Welcome to The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, Season 7, Episode 10, The Twilight Zones. Glad to have you back with us today. This episode dives deep into the ranch's past, and trust me, you won't want to miss what the team stumbles onto. This time, the team does something a little different. Instead of chasing lights in the sky or strange sounds echoing through the dark, they turn their attention downward to the ground beneath their feet, to the quiet, weathered corners of the property that rarely get this much focus. They want to understand the history of this land, specifically two old homesteads that have been sitting on the ranch for generations, slowly falling apart, slowly being forgotten by everyone except the land itself. But if there's one thing we've learned about Skinwalker Ranch over the years, it's this: nothing forgotten here truly stays forgotten for long. Let's talk about why this matters, because context really is everything in an investigation like this. Long before drones, ground-penetrating radar, and modern sensor equipment ever showed up on this land, real families lived here. They built homes with their own hands. They raised animals. They tried to carve out ordinary, peaceful lives on a piece of land that, as we now know all too well, has never really been ordinary. Over the decades, most of what they built has slowly given way to time. Old wood turning gray and brittle, foundations cracking, walls leaning until they finally collapsed. Two of these old homesteads catch the team's attention in this episode, and they want to answer one simple but genuinely important question. Are these two places connected in some way? Not just because they happen to sit on the same sprawling ranch, but connected in a deeper sense, maybe tied to the very same unexplained activity that continues to define this land today. It's a smart question to ask, and honestly, it's overdue. If two homesteads, built at different times by different families, share something in common, their exact location, the way they're laid out, or even the stories quietly passed down by the people who once lived there, it could tell the team something much bigger about the ranch as a whole. Maybe the strange activity everyone talks about today isn't new at all. Maybe it's been happening quietly, patiently, for generations, long before any camera crew or research team ever arrived to document it. So where does an investigation like this even begin? With research, plain and simple. The team digs into old records, trying to learn who actually lived in these homesteads, when they were originally built, and whether anything unusual was ever reported by the families who once called this land home. This part of the investigation doesn't come with dramatic music or flashing lights, but make no mistake, it matters just as much as anything that happens out in the field. Because understanding the past here isn't just a history lesson tacked on to the beginning of an episode. It's a genuine way of understanding the present. If this ranch really has been quietly affecting the people who live on it for generations, that changes the entire picture of what this investigation is actually trying to solve. Once the historical groundwork is laid, it's time to go out into the field, and this is where the episode really starts to breathe. Walking up to these old homesteads is nothing like walking through a preserved museum exhibit with signs and roped-off paths. There's no curation here, no polish, just decay in its rawest, most honest form. Collapsed wooden beams, cracked stone foundations, structures that have been quietly giving in to the elements for years, maybe decades. But here's the thing about this team, that decay isn't something they see as sad or wasted. It's something to be read, almost like a language. Every broken wall, every fallen support beam, every strange mark or discoloration on old wood could be a clue waiting to be noticed. They're not simply cataloging what's left behind for the sake of a record. They're actively trying to piece together what actually happened at these sites, and more importantly, whether any of it connects to the anomalies still playing out on this land today. Watching how this team operates is honestly one of the more satisfying parts of this episode. They don't rush in and start digging the moment they arrive. They take their time. They walk the perimeter of each site first, paying close attention to how the homesteads are laid out, how far apart the two locations actually sit from one another, and what natural features surround them. Nearby trees, water sources, changes in elevation, sight lines toward other locations on the ranch already known for strange activity. Every single detail gets carefully written down, logged, cross-referenced. On this property, nothing is ever treated as random or coincidental until it's actually been proven to be exactly that. Then come the tools, the instruments that have become almost signature to this investigation over the years. Ground-penetrating radar gets brought in to check what might be hiding just beneath the surface, because time and time again, this team has learned a hard lesson. The biggest discoveries on this ranch are rarely sitting out in plain sight, waiting to be found. More often than not, they're buried, hidden in the soil, hidden beneath structures that themselves sit atop even older structures, hidden in ways that no amount of walking around with your eyes open will ever reveal. Magnetometers get set up too, used to measure whether anything unusual is happening with the electromagnetic energy at these specific spots. Because if these two homesteads really are linked in some meaningful way, that link might not show up as something you can physically see. It might only reveal itself in the numbers, in the readings, in the quiet language of data that this team has spent years learning to interpret. And here's where things get genuinely interesting, because going into this investigation, the team isn't expecting anything especially dramatic. On paper, this feels like the kind of episode built purely to lay groundwork. A methodical, patient investigation meant to set the stage for something bigger down the road. That's often how these historical deep dives play out. But that is not what happens here. Instead, without warning, the team gets caught completely off guard. Let's slow down here for just a moment, because that reaction alone tells us a great deal about what's actually unfolding. This is a team that has already seen more strange, unexplainable things than most people could ever imagine encountering in a lifetime. They've recorded energy readings that defy conventional explanation. They've documented lights and phenomena in the sky and across the land that still, to this day, don't have clean scientific answers. They've had firsthand experiences that would make even the most hardened skeptic stop, pause, and genuinely reconsider what they thought they understood about the world. And yet, even carrying all of that hard-earned experience and healthy skepticism with them, this seemingly straightforward investigation into two old, crumbling homesteads manages to genuinely surprise them. That detail alone should tell you something important. Whatever they stumble onto here isn't a minor footnote buried in a season full of bigger moments. It's significant enough to catch a deeply experienced, battle-tested team completely off guard. And that's exactly the kind of moment that makes an episode like this one impossible to look away from. So what does that surprise actually look like when it happens? Maybe it's a reading that doesn't match anything they've recorded before across all their years on this ranch. Maybe it's a physical detail at one of the two homesteads that suddenly reframes everything they thought they understood about how these two structures relate to one another. Whatever specific form it takes, you can feel the entire mood of the investigation shift in real time. The team stops simply moving through their checklist of tasks and starts leaning in, asking sharper and more pointed questions, immediately cross-referencing what they're seeing right now against everything they already know about the ranch's broader, ongoing anomalous activity. And really, that shift is the through line of this entire episode: connection. Not just the connection between two old homesteads that happen to sit on the same sprawling property, but a much deeper connection between the past and the present. Between the families who once lived here, who once tried to build ordinary lives on this extraordinary land, and whatever it is that's still happening here today. If these two homesteads truly are linked in some meaningful way, it raises a much bigger and more unsettling question. Has this ranch's strange activity been consistent across generations? Was this happening quietly, long before any research team ever arrived with cameras, sensors, and scientific equipment? Because if the answer turns out to be yes, that doesn't just add one more small data point to an already crowded investigation. It fundamentally reframes the entire timeline of what this ranch actually is and how long it's been behaving this way. There's also something quietly, deeply human about this particular episode that I think deserves real attention. And it would be easy to overlook it in favor of the more sensational discoveries. It would be simple enough for a show like this to treat two old homesteads as nothing more than broken, decaying set pieces to be scanned, measured, and moved past. But there's a genuine sense of respect running through how this team approaches the investigation. These weren't just structures. These were homes. Real families lived within these walls, raised children here, tried to build futures here, and for reasons that may never be fully known, those lives eventually ended or moved on, leaving these places to slowly surrender to time. As the team investigates, they're not only chasing strange readings and unexplained data, they're genuinely trying to understand what life might have actually been like for the people who once called this land home, and whether those very same families experienced any of the same unexplainable events that continue to unfold on this ranch to this day. As the investigation deepens and the day wears on, the discoveries begin to layer on top of one another, each one adding a new and unexpected dimension to the overall story. This is one of those moments in the series where you can practically feel the pieces starting to click into place. Not completely, of course, because this ranch has never once given up its secrets easily or all at once, but enough to genuinely feel like real tangible progress is being made. The team starts drawing connections between what they're uncovering at these two homesteads and patterns they've noticed elsewhere on the property in previous investigations. A small detail that seemed isolated or unimportant back in an earlier episode suddenly resurfaces here, recontextualized in a completely different and far more significant light. That's a big part of what makes this show so genuinely addictive to follow season after season. Nothing here ever exists in complete isolation. Every single investigation, every discovery, no matter how small it initially seems, eventually loops back into the larger, ongoing mystery of what this ranch actually is and why it continues to behave the way it does. By the time this episode reaches its most pivotal moments, there's a genuine, palpable sense that the team has stumbled onto something capable of shifting the entire direction of the investigation moving forward. And here's the part worth sitting with. They weren't even looking for a breakthrough of this scale. This started out as a fairly straightforward exercise in history and layout, a patient, methodical look at two old, decaying structures sitting quietly on the property. But the ranch, true to its long-standing form, had other plans entirely. It offered up something completely unexpected, arriving at the exact moment the team least expected it, and now they're left holding on to a thread that could unravel far more than just the mystery surrounding these two particular homesteads. What makes this episode so genuinely compelling, at least in my view, is that it doesn't wrap itself up with a clean, tidy, satisfying explanation by the time the credits roll. This simply isn't that kind of story, and honestly, few stories on this ranch ever are. Instead, it's the kind of story that quietly opens a door and leaves it open. The team walks away from these two homesteads carrying more questions than they had going in. But crucially, they're better questions, sharper, more focused, more likely to actually lead somewhere meaningful in future investigations. That's simply the nature of how this ranch operates. Every single answer seems to generate at least 2 or 3 new questions in its wake. And every investigation, regardless of how narrow or targeted it initially appears, seems to inevitably ripple outward into the much larger ongoing mystery of what exactly is happening on this. So, as we move deeper into the breakdown of this episode, here's exactly what I want you to pay close attention to. First, watch carefully how the historical research shapes and sets up everything that follows later in the episode. The team's choice to zero in on these two specific homesteads isn't arbitrary or random in the slightest, and truly understanding why they focused on these particular sites will help you appreciate just how significant the eventual discoveries actually turn out to be. Second, pay close attention to the technical process itself. The scans, the readings, the slow and deliberate walkthrough of each individual site. Because the exact moment where everything shifts from routine data collection to something genuinely remarkable is built entirely on that patient groundwork. And third, keep a close eye on how the team reacts in real time as events unfold. Their visible surprise, their sudden shift in energy and focus, their heightened intensity in the moment. That raw, unscripted emotional authenticity is very often the clearest possible signal of just how significant a discovery truly is. This episode, fittingly titled The Twilight Zone, earns that name in a way that feels genuinely deliberate rather than simply catchy. There's something inherently liminal about investigating structures caught directly between the past and the present, between what once was and what still quietly lingers. These two homesteads exist in a kind of in-between space, no longer fully part of the living, breathing present day, yet not entirely swallowed up by history either. And that liminal, in-between quality seems to mirror exactly what the team ultimately uncovers here. Discoveries that exist right at the boundary between what we thought we already understood about this ranch and what we're only now beginning to genuinely grasp. As we head toward the conclusion of this particular investigation, there's a palpable, unmistakable sense that this episode isn't simply a standalone story tucked neatly into the middle of the season. It feels far more like a genuine hinge point, a moment the rest of the season may end up turning on. The connections drawn between these two old homesteads and the unexpected discoveries that emerge from investigating them so carefully feel very much like they're quietly setting up something much larger for the remainder of the season ahead. This is genuinely the kind of episode you'll likely want to revisit once you've seen what comes later, because a great deal of what's uncovered here seems poised to resonate in ways that simply aren't fully clear just yet. And that ultimately is the real magic of this show, season after season. It takes something that initially sounds almost too simple, looking into two old, decaying homesteads sitting quietly on a property, and transforms it into a genuine, memorable breakthrough moment. One built carefully on thorough historical research, patient and methodical fieldwork, and a team's genuine willingness to follow the evidence wherever it ultimately leads, even when that evidence takes them somewhere they never once expected to go. Skinwalker Ranch has never been a place that gives up its mysteries easily or quickly, but episodes like this one serve as a powerful reminder of exactly why it remains so worth continuing to look season after season. Because sometimes the biggest breakthroughs aren't found by chasing something entirely new. They're found by finally understanding something that's been sitting right there all along, quietly waiting patiently the whole time. That's the full story behind Season 7, Episode 10 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, The Twilight Zone. A history-driven investigation that quietly turns into something none of us saw coming, and a powerful reminder that on this property, even the oldest, most forgotten structures still have secrets left to tell. Secrets that, once uncovered, have a way of reshaping everything we thought we already understood about this land. If this episode taught us anything, it's that Skinwalker Ranch doesn't separate its past from its present the way most places do. Here, the old and the new exist side by side, constantly informing one another, constantly circling back around. Two forgotten homesteads, sitting quietly for generations, turned out to hold pieces of a much larger puzzle. And that's a pattern worth remembering as this investigation continues to unfold in the episodes still ahead. It's also worth pausing to think about what it actually takes to run an investigation like this one well. This isn't a team that gets to walk onto a site with a metal detector and hope for the best. Every step of this process, from the earliest historical research all the way through to the final readings taken out in the field, requires patience, discipline, and a willingness to treat even the smallest, most unremarkable detail as potentially important. That's not an easy mindset to maintain, especially on a property that has, over the years, produced so many false starts and dead ends alongside its genuine breakthroughs. And yet, episode after episode, this team continues to approach the work the same way, carefully, methodically, without cutting corners, because they know that on this ranch, the difference between a missed detail and a major discovery can be razor thin. That discipline is exactly what pays off here, because if the team had simply glanced at these two homesteads, noted their condition, and moved on without digging deeper into the history or bringing in the right equipment, this entire discovery might never have happened. It's a reminder that some of the most important findings on this property don't come from chasing the next big anomaly. They come from going back over what's already there, looking at it with fresh eyes, and asking better questions than anyone has asked before. There's also a broader pattern worth noticing here, one that longtime viewers of this show will likely pick up on immediately. So much of what makes Skinwalker Ranch such a compelling ongoing mystery is the way individual investigations spread out across different episodes and even different seasons start to connect once you step back and look at the bigger picture. A detail uncovered while investigating a mesa might suddenly matter again when the team is standing at an old homestead a season later. A reading taken near one hotspot might echo something recorded years earlier in a completely different part of the property. This episode fits neatly into that pattern. What starts as a narrow, focused look at two specific structures ends up reaching outward, touching on questions the team has been asked for years about the ranch as a whole. And that's really the tension this episode leaves us with. The tension between the specific and the sweeping. On one hand, this is a very grounded, very human story about two old homes and the families who once lived in them. On the other hand, it's a story that hints at something much larger, something that stretches across generations and refuses to stay contained within the boundaries of a single investigation. Balancing those two scales, the intimate and the immense, is part of what makes this show so effective at holding your attention, episode after episode, season after season. As you watch this one unfold, it's worth remembering that the team didn't set out that day expecting to find anything career-defining. They set out to answer a fairly narrow question about two old homesteads and how they might relate to each other. That's often how the biggest moments on this ranch happen, not through grand dramatic searches for the answer to everything, but through quiet, patient, unglamorous work that just happens to stumble into something enormous. It's a lesson this team has learned again and again over the years, and this episode reinforces it in a way that feels honest rather than manufactured. By the end of the Twilight Zone, you're left with a very particular feeling, not closure exactly, but momentum. A sense that the ground has shifted slightly beneath the entire investigation, even if it's not yet clear exactly how far that shift will reach. That's a difficult balance for any episode to strike. And it's one of the reasons this particular installment stands out within the season. It doesn't rely on a single dramatic reveal to hold your attention. Instead, it builds its impact slowly, layer by layer, until the final discovery lands with real weight because you've watched every step that led to it. So when you sit down to watch this one, don't just wait for the big moment. Pay attention to the whole arc. The research, the walkthrough, the equipment, the slow build of tension, and finally, the surprise that catches even this experienced team off guard. Because that full arc is exactly what makes the eventual breakthrough feel earned rather than convenient, and it's exactly what makes Season 7, Episode 10, one of the more quietly significant episodes in the story of Skinwalker Ranch so far. In the end, the Twilight Zone isn't just about two old homesteads. It's about what happens when a team stops looking only forward and starts looking backward too, and discovers that the past on this ranch was never really finished speaking. It was simply waiting for someone to come back and listen closely enough to hear it. And that's exactly why this episode lingers with you well after it ends. It doesn't hand you a final answer wrapped up neatly with a bow. It hands you a new lens, a way of looking at every future investigation on this ranch, with the understanding that the ground itself, the very land these homesteads were built on, might be holding on to more history and more answers than anyone on this team has fully accounted for yet. Keep that in mind as the season moves forward, because if this episode is any indication, the story of Skinwalker Ranch is far from finished, and the past may still have plenty left to reveal. Thanks for watching this breakdown of Season 7, Episode 10, The Twilight Zones. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the ranch's history, stick around, because the mysteries here are only getting started.